ready for the simultaneous interpretation.
Click my name in the, and then assign me as the interpreter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have you assigned ready for it.
And I do see Carmen joining as well. So I believe those are our 2 interpreters for tonight.
Oh, I see. Okay, perfect. Okay, let me just make sure. Hi, welcome everyone. Good evening. You caught us in the middle of figuring out some technical, not really difficulties, but 1 second, just making sure we have our interpretation all set. Carmen, will you be the Spanish to English?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll be, yeah.
All right.
We both are Spanish from English and English into Spanish. Don't be concerned about that.
Okay. All right, I think we have both then. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience as we ironed out those details of interpretation. It's nice to be back. After having to miss a couple meetings, nice to see some familiar faces. Welcome to our 50th CSC meeting. This is a huge milestone and would really just love to honor and appreciate all the time and energy you've all invested and committed to this work. I know it hasn't always been easy and can be tolling at times, but really want to lift up that it's your commitment and your dedication that's really allowed for the implementation of AB 617 to come to reality and eventually the changes you'd all like to see in your community. As always, we're going to get started with some logistics, some meeting logistics. But while I go over these logistics, I welcome you all to maybe drop some things in the chat about, 1 or 2 things you appreciate from this space or something you'd hope to see more of, or you could do both. Just to kind of commemorate this milestone you've all been gathering for over 2 years now. And there's a lot to reflect on, and I know there's a lot more down the road. So yeah, maybe 1 or 2 things you appreciate about the space and something you hope to see more of. And with that, I'm going to move us along logistics of the meeting and give some instructions for interpretation. So I know we've all been using Zoom for quite some time now, but just going to walk through some instructions for some folks in case it's helpful. So in your Zoom controls, if you're joining us with your computer, you'll click the interpretation button, which is the icon with a globe. It's located at the bottom of the screen. You'll select the language you want to hear. You may choose English or Spanish. And please ensure that mute original audio is not selected so you can hear folks who are calling in through their phone. And just as a reminder, everyone must join a channel, either English or Spanish, so you can hear the meeting. We'd also like to start implementing a practice where we want to ask you all to state your name before you start speaking so that folks using interpretation know who that interpretation is coming from. And I'll try to remind folks throughout the meeting as well, but just wanting to plant that seed. And if you're calling in from a phone or a tablet using the Zoom app, you can access the interpretation by clicking the 3 dots, which are usually found at the bottom of the screen. You want to click the language interpretation from the menu and choose English or Spanish. Again, please be sure that mute original audio is not selected so you can hear everyone calling in through a phone. And then just another reminder, please state your name before you speak so that interpreter can identify who's speaking. I'm going to pause and let our interpreter give the instructions in Spanish. Okay. I guess in that case, is anyone having any issues accessing interpretation? All right. And just as a reminder, before we get started, please make sure your screen name on your window reflects this naming convention. So if you're a CSC member and or resident, you'll put your CSC or R in front and then your first and last name. This is an important reminder as it helps us track attendance, especially for those participating in the stipend program. For all other participants, please use this naming convention with your first and last name followed by your organization or agency. And just a few reminders for the virtual settings. So please ensure your mic is on mute unless you're speaking or planning to speak. And if you're calling in by phone, you will need to press *6 to enable that. If you have a comment or question, please raise your hand on Zoom and we'll call on you, or feel free to drop that in the chat. If you are calling in by phone, you will need to press *9 to raise your hand and lower your hand. And just as a reminder for folks participating in the stipend program, you will need to stay at least 75% of the meeting time to be eligible for our stipend for this month. So the meeting officially started at 5:30 tonight, so you'll need to stay at least until 7 p.m. to be eligible for the stipend. And just going to quickly walk through our group agreements to ensure we have some productive call tonight. So reminder to let's all help each other achieve the meeting goals by focusing on solutions, opportunities, and trying to maintain a productive dialogue. We are a large group, so we want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. If you tend to speak up a lot during the meetings, we encourage you to make space for others. And if you tend to stay quiet or are shy during the meetings, we welcome you to take up space, share your questions and ideas. They're very much welcome here. Please remember to be civil and respectful. It's always okay to disagree, and this can be done in a respectful manner. We do have quite a packed agenda as usual, so let's try to stay on point and on time by keeping your comments brief and to the point. This will also allow for space for others to speak. Whenever there's disagreement, remember to attack the problem and not the person. We want to honor each other's humanity and dignity. After all, we are humans with feelings before any other roles or positions we hold. And then lastly, let's all remember to do our best to seek common ground and find some opportunities to identify solutions. And as our usual practice now, we do want to do some land acknowledgements so that we are mindful of ancestral territories that we all occupy. Also recognizing that First Nations are the traditional stewards of these lands. So my colleague, Dr. Hema Cardona, is calling from Oakland, California, which is on the unceded territory of the Chochenyo Muwekma Ohlone. I'm calling from San Diego, which is on unceded territory of the Kumeyaay. And for those living in Fresno, you're on the traditional homelands of the Yokuts, who were originally the only residents until the colonists arrived. And most of the Yokuts were unfortunately killed during the California genocide. And despite the resources and land endowment, the Yokuts made that area possible really to live livable by way of developing irrigation systems, which is still valuable technology that we all use today. So we honor these ancestral lands and those who remain stewards of the land for generations to come. So with that said, I'm going to pass it first to Ryan from the Air District for some welcoming remarks, and then we'll pass it off to tonight's co-host, Genevieve, for her welcoming remarks.
I don't think that Ryan he was having computer issues, so I think he is still trying to connect, okay. But in his place, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here.
Thanks, Jamie and Jen. I also don't have much to share. I'm excited to dig in. We'll go over the AB 617 annual report and then dive into the indirect source review presentation, the ISR. So I don't really have anything to say.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Genevieve. I'm glad to be co-hosting with you tonight, and yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Oh, Ryan, I see Ryan just joined in. Hi, welcome, Ryan. We were just passing it off to you for welcoming remarks.
Thank you. I apologize for being delayed. I rarely experience any computer problems, but today, for some reason, my computer decided to completely crash on me. So I apologize for being late. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here and see all of you. I know we have a lot of topics, and we worked closely with the steering committee members on presenting information tonight that was requested, and happy for the conversation. And yeah, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm so sorry, I just realized I didn't have my screen sharing on, but here is our agenda for tonight. Again, we have quite a packed agenda, but we have, we'll start off as usual with the action items tracker, and then a quick update on the annual report. We'll hear from the Air District, and then we'll spend the bulk of the meeting hearing about the indirect source review program. So we have a presentation from Air District, and Genevieve will help guide that conversation, and then followed by some standing updates and agenda setting and next steps. As usual, there's space to make suggestions for agenda items at the end of each meeting or on our agenda setting meetings, which happen a week after the CSC meetings. Or you can always email or call the Air District with your suggestions. But with that said, are there any proposals to the amendments to tonight's agenda? I don't see any raised hands. Okay. All right, with that said, I'm gonna pass it off to Stephanie from the Air District to provide us some updates on the action items.
Thanks, Sam, and good evening, everyone. Happy 50th meeting to you all. Again, this is just a routine check-in on the action items that we've had from previous meetings, and I'll focus on the ones that came out of the last meeting. I'm gonna share my screen. And again, as a reminder, these are broken up into items that are still in progress and then ones that have been completed. So from the last meeting, one that we are still working on is Air District will discuss CSC membership and recruitment at the next agenda setting. And so we will plan to do that at an upcoming agenda setting meeting. And then hopping over to our completed items, we have a few of them that are completed from the last meeting. One of those is the Air District will share a list of community groups that are in the AB 617 boundary. And so following last month's meeting, the Air District did email a list of these CBOs to the contractor in the city of Fresno. We also posted it at our website. The link is here, and I'm happy to share it in the chat too. And so if folks do want to take a look at this list and add any edits or amendments, you're welcome to email us at AB 617, and we can make updates to that list. And then also Caltrans will provide a summary of public comments and feedback provided to Caltrans on the environmental document released. And so Caltrans following the meeting, thanks to Dave Dia from Caltrans, he provided a response that we emailed out on the 29th of September. And then similarly, the Air District did commit to following up with the city of Fresno regarding the Elm Street rezoning. And we did share updates on the city council meeting also in that same email from the 29th of September. So those are the updates we have from the last meeting. Does anyone have any questions about those? If not, I'm happy to take any questions also in the chat throughout the meeting, but otherwise I'll pass back to Jen.
Awesome, thank you, Stephanie. If there are any questions, feel free to, if something comes up, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll monitor that. Okay, moving along then to the annual report discussion. I'll hand it off to Ryan to give us an update on that.
Thanks, Jem. As a bit of background on this topic, so every year we are required to put together an annual report of the progress that is being made for the CARB selected communities. And so I know, I believe last week the draft was sent out to all the steering committee members in both English and in English to our English speaking members and Spanish to our Spanish speaking members. I'm going to share the English version, but if you have the Spanish version, please follow along. Really what we are looking to do is if people have had an opportunity to review the document and have specific feedback today, we're happy to take it. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, we ask that you please do and provide input either through email or if you'd prefer, you can definitely call one of the AB 617 team members and share your feedback verbally if that's what you would prefer to do. And so I'm just going to kind of go through the different sections of the annual report. None of this information is new. It's definitely captured in each meeting, when we bring up the SERP tracker and talk about the progress for different measures in that is part of the South Central SERP. So this is just really a recap of that. I think the other key piece that we're looking for is, we're definitely trying to make this report more relatable, more understandable by a broader audience. Being CSC members, you're involved in this every month, and you're witnessing kind of firsthand what's going on. These annual reports definitely are for a broader audience than just you. It's for community members that aren't participating and want to understand what's going on. State legislators, CARB, staff, others that can look at the report and see what's going on. We've definitely taken feedback from the steering committee members over the years on how we can continue to look to improve this report. Definitely previous versions of the report, it was more word focused. And so, some of the feedback that we got was, trying to find more ways to bring in more infographics that more easily explain stuff. So we definitely tried to incorporate more of that into the annual report, more visual displays of the information, and along, with the other things. But so let me go ahead and share it. Can everybody see it? All right, perfect.
Yes.
Now, I know how I'm going to scroll through some of it, and if you're looking at it, that sometimes I know that can be disorienting because it goes by kind of quick. But so it starts off with just kind of the overall implementation of AB 617 valley-wide, and then it kind of gets more into the specifics for South Central Fresno. We go through the individual measures that are included as part of the SERP. And then, the allocations, funding allocations, and the emissions reductions targets, list the incentive measures that were part of the SERP, kind of where we're at, and, we have to go through a process. There was like a pre-approved set of measures. Then there were the ones that we worked with CARB to develop community identified project plans. And so this kind of outlines where we're at with those. Credit to all of you. We have by far the most approved community identified project plans that have been approved by CARB. We have a lot with CARB right now for their review and providing updates to you as we go through the process of hopefully getting those approved shortly. And then a few more that are still in the drafting phase. Just some information on some of the successful programs. This is the Lawnmower Exchange that I know many of you participated in one way or another, got people to come, and it was a really great event. I'm super excited about the event that we're going to have on the 29th, and look to once again get CSC member support for that event. The outreach is really important. I know they've shared about getting out to schools once again and really doing a lot of that face-to-face work. Yeah, I see your hand up, Lisa.
Yeah, I already have somebody who wants a lawnmower.
Okay, fantastic.
So yeah, if we can hook them up before the 29th, that would be fabulous.
Okay, yeah. If you want to drop the information in, we can share that information with our grant staff.
Oh, your grant staff. How about if I call you tomorrow?
I'm going to be in meetings, but yeah, I mean, if you want to shoot me the information, we'll
All right.
taken care of.
Thank you.
The compliance enforcement measures, there was a lot of desire to see enhanced enforcement. And so this is kind of a breakdown of what's happened over the last year. There's going to be a few appendices that break down that information in a lot more detail. The regulatory measures, the rule development that many of you have been involved with. As part of this, we have to go through a best available retrofit control technology review. So there's a discussion of that and where that is at. the land use measures that were in the SERP, the truck reroute, and the work that has been done there, the community air monitoring that has been going on. Definitely a discussion about health impacts and local air pollution. And then,
Lisa, is that a new hand or did you just forget to lower? Might be an old hand. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
and so, yeah, this gets to the meat of it. It's the SERP trackers themselves. This is the information that we routinely share with the committee, and encourage you to share with others that that live or work in the community, to make them aware of what's going on, the considerable work that's going on. So we shared those. You have the enforcement plan update. So this includes the inspections that were performed by enforcement staff. It lists each of the inspections that were performed. So here's all the inspections that were performed, the type of inspection it was.
Cool.
The data.
Ryan, is there anything you can share from this section on enforcement? Is there anything of note?
Well, I mean, we perform a lot of inspections, and so a lot of this, gets to the enhanced enforcement that we're doing. If there are emissions violations at sources, they get put on, or they're required to be inspected more often.
Right. And did any of these inspections lead to any type of enforcement actions or violations?
Yeah. So that'll be on the next set. So these are the inspections, and then in regards to the last sections, the notice of violation. So these are the complaints that were received within the boundaries of the community. We perform an investigation for every single complaint that we receive, and it includes all the information, what the nature of the violation or the nature of the complaint was, and what our investigation findings were. And then the last section is a summary of the violations that were discovered as part of either complaint investigations or compliance investigations or fireplace surveillance. And so it includes the description of the violation and the rules that were violated. And if there's a corresponding facility, it lists the facility and the facility ID, the district ID number. And so I know this is very tiny, it's hard to see. So hopefully everybody has their hard copies of this, and they can review. So that's kind of the summary of it. And like I said, we're really looking to get feedback on how we can continue to look to improve these reports and sharing out this information with a broad audience.
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions or initial reactions regarding the annual report?
Yeah, I had a question. Ryan, how can people reach out to you? You mentioned that you're looking for feedback on how to improve the report. How can residents do that?
Yeah, and I believe in the email that we sent out, we did include ways to contact. And if not, I see Stephanie nodding her head that we did include the contact information, but we'll definitely, after this meeting, we'll send out another email to the entirety of the community steering committee on, with both like email contact as well as phone numbers for people to call.
And Ryan, quick question. I'm on the 617 website.
Okay.
And looking for the draft report.
Yes.
And I don't see it under today's meeting, or is it perhaps in the link in the agenda?
Oh, you know, so it's actually under, on the right-hand side of the page, there's reports and document archive. And so if you click on that, it has, you know, the draft annual report there. And also, I believe it's in the communication with members, if I'm remembering correctly, Stephanie. It's also.
It is. And it's also linked in the agenda too for folks that have the agenda.
Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm guilty of it. This is Jem speaking, but just remembering again, please state your name when speaking so interpreters can relay who's talking.
I struggled with that. I apologize.
No, I just did it too. So just a reminder. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Any other questions about the annual report? Seems like they'll send out again ways for you all to submit your feedback and reflections. Lisa, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I'm in regards to planning and zoning changes within the footprint of AB 617. Is there, or are you calculating positive or negative changes based on zoning changes and construction? Because you know, there's going to be some construction going on with dense housing, and how is that going to be helpful, or is it going to be detrimental because they're really relying a lot on less car usage and more transit opportunities, and also too, as well as the zoning that's happening in Southwest Fresno, where the air quality may be impacted. So how is that also calculated in your report?
That's an interesting comment or suggestion, Lisa. The way that it's reported out is simply focused on the measures and you know, the things kind of ancillary to that. You know, how some of that stuff can be captured is you know, something that we haven't accounted for. You know, what we did was for each of the measures, we had assigned a certain amount of emission reductions for each of those based on specifics. You know, some of the ones where it was like partnering with other agencies, we didn't assign an emissions reduction benefit to those, understanding that they're, you know, hopefully through collaborative work with different agencies, you know, getting them to understand the concerns and, you know, potential ways to mitigate, and strongly encouraging that those practices be adopted. You know, which, you know, we've seen some of that already happening. You know, that there would also be benefits, but not necessarily captured, you know, with a specific emission reduction.
And also, are you capturing your interactions and also your appearances at City Council, Planning Commission, district review committees in regards to comments from the Air District as well?
Yes, our department tracks, you know, the commenting letters that we provide.
There's comment letters, and then there's appearances advocating positions.
Well,
Or
similar to what I shared last month with you, Lisa, I definitely believe that having something on record, because, you know, understanding that there's limited times, it's, you know, the letters that we provide include a lot of information that wouldn't be captured in just a few minutes. And so it's really important for us to be on record with a full accounting of, you know, our position on things. And so we provide that. And, you know, it's always our belief in the system that, you know, being included in an item that it is considered and is part of that, the consideration that is being made when it's before people.
Okay, I can understand that. And also too, how are you going to account for the truck reroute study,
Mhm.
if the recommendations are like major changes and actually reduces impacts, how do you plan to quantify that if you don't do some number crunching on the land use?
Yeah, I mean,
How are you going to show improvement?
That's definitely, we're going to base it on the science. And so, I mean, if there is quantifiable emission reductions as a result of it, we've definitely looked to capture that. A lot of emissions are based on vehicle miles traveled. And so, I mean, if there's not a demonstrable reduction in vehicle miles traveled, even though, like, say there's a reroute recommended, there may not be an overall vehicle miles traveled reduction, but.
So you're going to do vehicle miles, a global perspective versus here's an area, this is what we know it to be. After we do this truck reroute, this is the improvement we saw in this one distinct area.
Yeah, there may be opportunities to look at other things, other benefits. This is where the public health study is going to be so important. In looking at the potential risk reductions as a result of truck reroutes. I think those are the things that we may look to incorporate into annual reports, to highlight those positive benefits. So we're definitely looking forward to seeing the information that comes out of the health studies, and then recommended or potential recommended rerouting and what those benefits will be.
And in your report, are you mentioning any of those future items that you're looking forward to bringing to next year's report, maybe?
Yes, I mean, in the annual report, we definitely talked about the public health study that is part of the truck reroute and the information that we're hoping to get out of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. If there are any more, you can feel free to call or email Air District. I'm sure they'd be happy to address that. Thank you, Ryan. Sorry, this is Jem speaking. I think with that, I'm going to move us along. Next part of the agenda, which is really the bulk of tonight's meeting, will be focused on the indirect source review. Oh, Naomi, I see your hand is up.
Hi, Ryan. I'm sorry. I frankly didn't have the time to go through the entire document. So if you can point me to where that is. What is the update on the status of the MOU with the city?
Yeah, I know it's been shared a few times. And so and I don't want to speak on, I know we have members of the city, I believe, on the call, but from our perspective, what was shared out was that the city was not looking to do an MOU with the district.
And that's it. So they say no, and then we just sit down, and because that is a commitment that is part of the resolution approved by CARB when the SERP was approved. So I would be concerned if I was the Air District trying to see what can be done, because it's not like, well, we tried it one and that's it. I'm sorry, this is the first time I'm hearing that the position is because they didn't want to do it. We're moving along and just ignoring it.
Well, once again, I don't want to speak for the city. I know Jennifer's here. But one of the challenges with AB 617 that we talked a lot about is that you have to have willing partners, because the legislation itself does not require agencies to do what is in the CERT. I mean, we definitely want to do everything that is in the CERT because we believe in it. And we had considerable engagement with the city on ways in which we could, because the CERT itself says it gave multiple options, and MOU was definitely one of them, but it also talked about alternative mechanisms. And so what was discussed was doing a letter between the city and the district, and taking the things that had been talked about in the various subcommittees and incorporating it, really with the focus of how members of the community can be more engaged in the process, provide comments, have their voices heard more. And so, we had worked on a letter of understanding between the district and the city. Several iterations were shared out. But ultimately, the decision was that the letter of understanding was not what was desired. And so it was only a memorandum of understanding, and in our discussions with the city, it was not something that the city was looking to engage in.
Well, I may take this as an opportunity to remind us why we're talking about the indirect source review rule, or we're about to, because this is a rule that is squarely within the jurisdiction of their district to implement, meaning we actually have some control here and can further a zero emission future for the AB 617 community through air district regulation, rather than working with unwilling partners.
I agree, Genevieve, but I want to make sure that there is an action item included towards the, the ones that we review at the end of the agenda, that there was subcommittee meeting on that, and then, nothing happened. So I understand we're not going to spend the rest of the 2 hours here discussing this, but I think I don't feel okay with just leaving it like, oh, well, that's it. Nothing is happening. I don't know about the others, but I don't feel okay. If I need to go and talk to, CAR, we need to talk to CAR, or, what happens now, right? So I think that I just want to put it as a follow-up item so that we can sit down together and decide how do we move forward with this. Unless all the other my fellow steering committee members think that I'm just like the only one that is interested about this and should just drop it.
You're not, Naomi. I agree. I agree with you. And I know it's not on the agenda per se right now, but I agree.
So, Naomi, are you suggesting we have a subcommittee meeting on this? We schedule a subcommittee. Okay.
This is Jem. Thank you. And we'll note that as an action item. And just as a friendly reminder, please remember I know this is going to be a new practice, but stating your name so folks know who's talking, who's using interpretation. Thanks. Genevieve, I'll pass it off to you, I guess, to kick us off with a conversation.
Yeah, as long as Lisa, is that an old hand?
Yeah, and as a member of the public, I'm very disappointed with the city not coming to the table and working in good faith, especially to help the air quality in Fresno, because it's only makes the place a better selling point if you have good air.
Thanks, Lisa. Does anyone else want to comment on that before we move on? I share the disappointment. Okay. Well, we're going to have a conversation about the ISR rule in the San Joaquin Valley as it was developed a little while ago, and how it compares to the new ISR that was developed in the Los Angeles area, or the South Coast Air District. And so I guess we will pass it to Ryan. Are you leading the charge when it comes to the presentation?
No, I'm going to turn it over to the experts who know
Mark.
much more than me, Mark Montalongo, who's a program manager. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Can you all see that presentation there?
Yes.
Awesome. So thank you for inviting me to your meeting this evening. It's kind of nice to hear the 50th inaugural meeting for the South Central Fresno community. So happy to talk to you about the district's indirect source review rule. It's been implemented since 2006, going on year 16 here. So thank you for having me. I'm Mark Montalongo, and I am the program manager here in our permits department. I have a few slides here I'm going to present on our ISR program and South Coast's recently adopted indirect source review program, and maybe provide you some tools and some resources that can help you come up to speed on what we do on an annual basis in terms of some of the annual reports that we do on an annual basis that are available on our website. So moving on, the district's indirect source review rule was the first in the nation to adopt a indirect source review rule, requirements to help mitigate emissions from new development projects. And it was adopted in late 2005 and implemented in 2006. The purpose of the indirect source review rules to mitigate increases in growth-related emissions from NOx and PM10 emissions specifically, to reduce project-related construction and operational related emissions associated with new development projects. The district's indirect source review promotes the incorporation of clean air features in project design. If the required reductions are not achieved through on-site measures, the developer pays the off-site fee for the remaining reductions that are required to be achieved pursuant to the mitigation requirements in the rule, and we'll get to those shortly. So we prefer, enough clean air measures, on-site measures preferred over the payment of off-site fees. All off-site fees that are collected by the district are then used to fund emission reduction projects in the San Joaquin Valley. Some of the applicability criteria, the development projects that require a discretionary land use approval from a public agency and exceed any of these thresholds that I've listed here are subject to the rule. For example, 50 residential units, that would include single family and multifamily residential development. Another example here is 9,000 square feet of educational space, that would be schools, 10,000 square feet of government space. And then we also included a large development project. So anything that would require a non-discretionary approval. We have thresholds in section 2.0 of our rule, which is essentially a 5x multiplier of the regular discretionary thresholds that we have here. Transportation and transit projects are also subject to our indirect source review if they emit 2 tons of emissions, and we have some guidance on that.
Hey, Mark, can I jump in here just to help explain a little?
Sure.
This is Genevieve. If you could scroll back up. I just wanted to explain ministerial. That's a weird word that we don't use in everyday life.
Sure.
So how about I provide what I believe it means and you can correct me. But the district created this ISR rule for these development projects. And the definition was that these projects required discretionary land use approval from a public agency, meaning that they had to be approved by a public agency. So there was like an approval process for these projects. However, there were projects that were being proposed that were getting kind of like automatic approval. And so we're kind of skirting past the ISR rules by saying like we weren't getting discretionary approval, like we weren't, it was more ministerial, it was automatic, it was like paperwork. It wasn't something that we really had a full meeting on and stamp of approval. And so there were some projects getting by that because they didn't get quote unquote discretionary approval from a public agency, they were not having to apply with this ISR rule. And so the Air District saw this loophole in a sense, and so tried to correct it. And so for large development projects, so I believe it's more like 250 residential units, or let's see, for warehouses, it's like 125,000 square feet of warehouses. You'll have to comply with the ISR, no matter what type of like approval the public agency is defining it as, and as a way to kind of cover that issue that was happening for the large projects. Mark, did I
Yeah.
capture that?
Yeah, so essentially a discretionary approval. The public agency has the ability to approve or disapprove a project. So there's discretion involved in the project that is given. A ministerial approval, there's little to no judgment involved in approving the project. Therefore, it's either an allowed use, it's allowed by right. So essentially the district's indirect source review rule was to capture any new development that would be constructed that of course would exceed the thresholds. And so we experienced, or came to our attention, there were some projects that were being approved ministerially. So we went back and amended our rule and enhanced our rule to capture those projects.
Lisa, I see a question. And thank you, Mark.
Yes, Lisa Flores, Tower District Yay. I currently sit on the District 1 Planning Review Committee. It is made up of a group of citizens who look at initial projects to begin with before they go to the Planning Commission. And currently we're dealing with the subdivisions that are coming online. It's totally outside of 617, but we're dealing with subdivisions. We just okayed a part of a subdivision, I believe it was 86 homes. And we've been wondering about the ISR and kind of need some education on it. So we know what we're doing and we know the questions to ask and to provide the comments that need to go forward to the Planning Commission based on, us as residents reviewing this for our district. Is there any way that 617 is going to go out to the other district planning review committees with this form of like an education? Because this is something that District 1 has specifically requested from the city. And we haven't heard anything back, and it's been about 4 months. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
I believe it was a question.
Yeah, maybe that's a question for the city. It's a city committee.
It's a city committee formed by each council person. They name about anywhere from, one committee has 3 people on it, another has, I think ours has 8, and I think District 3 has more. And there's more of these committees coming on board to represent the different districts. And what it is that it's an advisory. It doesn't have any, authority, but what we do is that we look over things, we give comments, and those are forwarded to the planning department and to the planning commission about what are the issues that are brought up from residents within that district. And I know that this was brought up a couple of months ago because of a development. One of the hotels that was being changed over to a residence, they were changing it over to apartments. And we had questions regarding air quality and the closeness of the hotel, now going to be apartments, to the 99. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So maybe I could touch on like how we notify projects of rule applicability to indirect source review. So we use the CEQA commenting process. When we receive a project referral, we will notify the public agency of the applicability of the project to our indirect source review rule. So that's how we implement it on our end. If it's unclear, the developer can always contact us and get a determination if the project is subject to the rule or not. But that's typically how we notify the public agency of the applicability to our indirect source review rule. So, maybe as it pertains to the individual city committee that you're a part of, I'll leave that up to the city to respond on that.
So I guess, I don't know, I think we have at least one person from the city. I'm not sure if they can address this now, or this is something we can note and follow up with the city after.
What was
wanna-
the question?
Yep.
Jem, what was the question?
Lisa, do you want to repeat your question to the city?
A couple of months back, District 1 had requested the city to potentially provide a short course on the ISR, or to work with the Air District to provide one, because we have, you know, subdivisions going on west of the 99. We have housing developments coming up along the 99. You know, we have a bunch of stuff going on, and we were wondering how we can obtain a short course on indirect sources on this issue.
So I was not aware of that request, but we'll certainly look into it.
Yes, I gave it to Jose. It's actually part of a discussion we had. And I just think, you know, with some of these district review committees within the footprint of 617, short courses on land use are incredibly beneficial.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll make
Thank
sure
you.
that we get follow up on that. Thanks for raising it. This is Genevieve, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, this is Jem. I'm gonna just pause really quick. I am getting a notification that there's some confusion for the Spanish interpretation around the ISR. I think there's some confusion around terminology, so we'll just pause really quick, and I think maybe Juan, you can help troubleshoot this before we continue the conversation. Just want to make sure folks are being brought along.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna do English and then Spanish. So for indirect source review, I just want to clarify that's revisión de fuentes indirectas para nuestra gente, nuestra audiencia en español. Y obviamente también voy a proveer la información en la cajita de comentarios hacia la presentación para que tengan eso a la mano. Ya sé que tal vez lo hayan recibido, pero de todos modos para su conveniencia se los voy a compartir ahorita mismo. So pretty much I'm just going to send the PowerPoint presentation for the Spanish speaking audience just so they have it on hand, and just clarified the indirect source review translations for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. All right, Genevieve and Mark, I pass it back to you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so I'll keep moving on here, going to our next slide. So our ISR emission reduction requirements, the indirect source review rule is designed to reduce emissions impacts from development projects and to assist the Valley in meeting its air quality standards. Developers that are subject to this rule, or project proponents that are subject to this rule, are required to submit an air impact assessment application and reduce their emissions in accordance with the Rule 9510 emission reduction requirements. So for construction, they are required to mitigate their emissions or reduce their emissions by 20% for NOx, 45% for PM10. And for operational related emissions, this includes area and mobile sources. NOx must be reduced by 33.3% and PM10 by 50%.
And that's 50% from what baseline?
The statewide average.
Okay, and so that's updated every year and you have to be 50% beyond the existing year's average?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Emission reductions through project design. The district provides an extensive list of design features to assist developers reduce on-site emissions. So for construction, we're trying to ensure that they utilize clean construction equipment using the latest tier to construct their project. That's what we mean by clean construction equipment. And trucking fleets. Minimize vehicle miles traveled, so mixed-use projects, pedestrian-friendly access to mass transit, energy efficiency measures, zero-emission infrastructure, which would be solar and EV charging infrastructure. Some of the benefits are, it achieves immediate and permanent emission reductions. The emissions reductions directly benefit the local communities and the San Joaquin Valley as a whole, and minimize or eliminate the payment of off-site mitigation fees should there not be sufficient mitigation to achieve the roll reduction requirements.
Thanks, Mark. Does anyone have questions here? I see from Ivanka.
I'm worried that sometimes this is like heavy duty and people might have questions, but just don't even know where to ask. So ask as something, I just want to say to this committee, ask as the smallest part that is sparked in your mind that comes up as a question, just ask it then. Whether it's directly related to this part of the presentation or not, because we know this is like heavy info. And so for me, the way my wheels are turning in my head is when we're talking about these fees, the first thing that comes to my attention is if new development, especially in South Central, for every new development that is happening, and it's a warehouse, where are those fees going? And why does there have to be a sell-off possibility? So back in one of the first slides, it was stated that if they are over a threshold, then they can just pay off. Like, is that my understanding when you're like, just to break this down to layman's terms, when there is an over amount of NOx or PM that the developer can have offsite fees for emission reduction programs. So to me, that means you are still allowing in an area that's already overburdened to continue permitting, to continue to allow to permit them to over pollute instead of just saying you are limited to this much. If your warehouse is going to create an excess, then you need to downzone your warehouse. But my understanding of this presentation is that the amount of emissions that are being put out, there's a way to offset it without actually reducing the emissions. That offset is coming in way of, you can pay for your pollution, but you can still pollute. So tell me someone that I'm really hoping that what I'm saying is not accurate, because my understanding is you're saying that there's fees involved and that it's allowed to continue. And then secondary to that, those fees that are collected, you stated that they are within the San Joaquin Valley, and not necessarily that those fees that are collected are going to go back to mitigate the damages that are being caused in that area where that warehouse or that new development is putting off the pollution.
Ivanka, maybe perhaps I could, break it down a little bit further for you. So you have a given project that's subject to the rule, and they would have to achieve the emission reduction requirements in the rule. They can select as much mitigation as possible through the application process. And say, for example, there's not enough mitigation in there to achieve the emission reduction requirements. In order to achieve their emission reduction requirements, they would pay a mitigation fee. Now, that mitigation fee amount will be based off of the difference, pretty much. The difference between what they've incorporated on site and what's required.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, this is
I sound
Genevieve.
like
I think of,
You said is
yeah,
correct, Mark. What I just said may have sounded differently, but it's dressed up very nicely by you to still say there's no limitation. Like, this is a rule that is supposed to reduce emissions, but it's not reducing emissions. It's giving you another roundabout way to continue the pollution of these emissions if you pay us. So as we're back to the issue of land use problems, no MOU in place, this still is a concern that if the air district is allowing for an indirect source rule that allows the pollution to continue if you pay a fee. So what I'm saying is that rule has a lot of room for improvement, because the rule in an area that cannot reach attainment needs to say you are already overburdened. You cannot create a development that is going to be in excess of a certain amount. If you've reached that threshold, that's it. There is no pay and keep going. But right now, it appears that this rule allows us to allow development to pay to continue to pollute.
And so perhaps if I could just add to that. So,
Hey, Mark, let me jump in real quick. So it's Ryan Hayashi with the Air District. So Ivanka, I want to just a couple reminders when it comes to indirect source review rules. As Mark pointed out, like, we were the first ones to do this, and going back to 2006. Between 2006 and 2021, no one else in the country had a rule that would try to capture these emissions. And the only reason why we did it in the first place was because we had such, like, the challenges that our valley faces because of topography, because of a whole host of other issues, poor, planning decisions that were made in the past. We needed something more. We needed to get more emission reductions. And so that's where, like, kind of the basis where state law was changed to allow us to develop an indirect source review rule to find ways to reduce emissions from these types of projects. So, what we do with that is, when we get these applications, we always try to work with the people that are submitting these, the people that are going to be building these projects, to first consider using things that, like, clean equipment. Those are the things we ask them, like, can you use, like, are you going to be using, can you find? So yes, the initial goal is to try to find ways for them not to create the pollution. But, circumstances, they may not be able to get the equipment, it may not be available to them, it may not work for their specific circumstance. And so there's a calculation on what the emissions from the two phases, whether it's the construction or the later on the ongoing emissions, in which case there's fees that they would have to pay to us that we in turn have to put towards emission reduction projects. And the timing of it is intended that we get the money before any of this starts, so that we can look to offset and reduce the emissions before they would have even happened beforehand. So we're actually getting the emission reductions sooner. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying and the concerns, but just kind of going back, like, I think we're fortunate to have an indirect source review rule, because so many other places across the state that are also, in similar types of circumstances aren't afforded that opportunity. They don't have a rule like ours. And so,
thank you, Ryan.
I'm not trying to say it's perfect. Genevieve brought up the issue with the kind of the ministerial approvals in the past, and the efforts that we've made to correct that and capture these larger projects to make sure that the emission reductions are the equal emission reductions are offset, which is the term we use to say that we try to bring it in balance.
Thank you, Ryan. This is Genevieve. I just want to say one thing, and then maybe we can get back to the presentation so we can learn about other ways this rule has been implemented. I will say, to Ivanka's point, she's very right in that fines paid may be going to reduce emissions, but they're following this old school mentality that an emission reduced somewhere in the valley is the same as an emission reduced in that already overburdened community. Like if we replace a tractor in San Joaquin County, that's not the same for someone who's living across the street from a warehouse in South Fresno. And so we need to change our methodology here so that we're protecting public health. So moving forward, I think what Ivanka's saying is that that money should be staying local because that pollution is staying local. And while we are appreciative that the district developed the ISR, which set the stage for other districts to do it, we still remain the most polluted air basin in the United States. We still have yet to achieve our federal air quality standards, like multiple federal air quality standards. South Fresno is still the most polluted city in California. And so we still have a long way to go. And if our city is not, we talk about past poor land use decisions, we're still making bad land use decisions today. And as we are aware, we don't have much control over that. And so I think moving forward, there's definitely room for improvement in this rule. And I don't think that means that we're not appreciative of the work that's been done in the past. But I think the point being that these emissions are local and reduction should be local. And also, if developers may be deciding to pay the fee because that may be cheaper than upgrading their fleet to zero emission. And so thinking about ways to change the rule to actually push fleet changes locally rather than just paying a farmer in Kern County to change their tractor. I think these are ways we can start to improve the rule. But I see Nayamin's hand up, and Lisa, I'm not sure if yours is new, but I would like to get back to the presentation, but I will pass it to the Nayamin and Lisa.
Yeah, I'll just keep it brief because I won't repeat what you just said, but it is that why AB 617 was created, because the state recognized that all the improvements made on air quality across the state were not the same for communities like Fresno. And that wasn't that caused the need of coming down and saying what we can do in these particular communities that are left behind. So I think that the same could apply to this. It's like, yes, we're happy. Thank you for being proactive, creating this rule before nobody else did it. That's great. How can we make it better? Make it better by making sure that the monies come down to clean the air where the pollution is more what was generated in the first place. And maybe even having a way in which the community members can even say what type of projects can be implemented to reduce that pollution, like we have been doing for the past 3-4 years, discussing the strategies that are more relevant for community members. So just trying to sprinkle that spirit of AB 617 into other things that the Air District is doing.
And Lisa, I don't know if that's a new or old hand.
Oh, no, that's a new hand.
Okay.
I'm sitting here rather disgusted, actually. As Lisa Flores, Tower District A, 2006, great. We're in 2022, going into 2023. Things need to be changed. The way you guys did it back almost 2 decades ago isn't working. Need to be better, need to do better. It's about saving lives at this point. I'm kind of concerned that people are purchasing these offsets, which, excuse my language, but I consider them sin dollars or death dollars, because now you've defined how much a life is worth in these communities, which is really sad. I think that if you're going to purchase offsets, that they shouldn't be at they shouldn't be at the foothills. They shouldn't be in the San Joaquin River Conservancy or whatever, but it actually should be in the community in which these projects are in, because that would radically change the face of things. In fact, I don't like the idea of offsets because, you're poisoning a community that has had decades of poisoning. That's just wrong. We also need to change the local thought, both at the state, local, air district and city level of how you deal with land use. The biggest problem here is land use, guys, always has been. But, you know, I want to know, where are they buying these offsets from? And what sort of bargains are they making? Because, you know, if you get $50,000 out of a development, that's the cost of lives. And to me, that is just so immoral. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Mark, do you think we can continue the presentation?
I just want to add that we do our best to get emission reduction projects near the project site as possible. Sometimes the challenge is ensuring there are equal emission reductions for the actual project that we're needing to get reductions for, just to ensure that, you know, those reductions are occurring contemporaneous to the development project's emissions occurring. So we do our best on that point. Let me get back here. Moving on to the next slide here. So the emission reductions achieved through the fees that are collected by the district, after assessing taking into account all the clean air measures that have been proposed by the developer, mitigation fees are applied to achieve the remaining amount of emission reductions that need to be achieved. Some of the types of grant projects that we use those funds for are electrifying or replacing existing diesel-powered ag tractors or irrigation pump engines, replacing old trucks with new low-emission emitting trucks, grants to Valley school districts to replace older and high-polluting school buses, replacing older transit buses and other vehicles, residential purchases of electric vehicles, repairing older high-polluting vehicles, and also providing grants to Valley residents to replace fireplaces and non-certified wood-burning stoves with natural gas inserts, electric heat pumps, and other cleaner burning units. Just a historical ISR programs from 2006 to now. We continue to conduct outreach to land use agencies and assist with ISR compliance and the promotion of incorporating clean air measures into new development projects. Project design improvements and building practices. Over 19,000 tons of emissions have been reduced from on-site project design elements, benefiting local communities. The district continues its evaluation of our indirect source review program, rule stringency, available tools, resources, and clean air measures. This is kind of our homepage to our indirect source review program. It's got an overview of the program. It's got FAQs, it's got a brochure, our application forms, our annual reports that we conduct on an annual basis that have good information on how many applications we've received in a year, the fees that have been collected, the types of grant projects that we funded with the monies in that year. I can have one of my staff drop a link in the chat to that homepage should you wish to, look at some of the resources that we have available. And we're always looking to evaluate our rule and our rule stringency. So as you know, South Coast Air District recently adopted a warehouse indirect source review rule to target operational mobile source emissions. Their rule applies to new and existing warehouses that are greater than 100,000 square feet. The approach is very similar to the district's indirect source review rule in that it requires clean air project design elements to reduce NOx and particulate emissions. And, should those clean air measures not be sufficient, it's got a mitigation fee component to it to achieve the remaining reductions that may need to be achieved under the rule. It differs in that it applies to operational emissions from new and existing warehouses, while the district's rule applies to new construction and operational emissions from various development types, including residential warehouses, non-residential development. South Coast's rule is currently under litigation due to a lawsuit that was filed last year. The district is currently monitoring the lawsuit and will evaluate the outcome as potential future ISR enhancements are considered to the extent allowed under state and federal regulation and existing case law. So over the last 15 years, as we mentioned, we've been implementing this rule. I think there's a good story to tell in that there's been emission reductions that have been achieved of approximately over 30,000 tons when you include on-site and off-site emission reductions. And so that concludes the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is Genevieve. I'm going to add just a little more detail to the conversation when it comes to the South Coast rule, so we all understand what the key differences are. So the South Coast rule is a little different in that it actually, so it applies to warehouses greater than 100,000 feet. And it looks at the average annual truck trips that are visiting that warehouse. And it looks at, the different types of trucks. So if you have like heavy duty versus medium duty, and it figures out what those emissions are. And then based on that, the operator of that warehouse and or owner of that warehouse will have a number of points. It's like a menu of options. There's a number of points that the operators will have to meet every year, I believe. And those points, you get the most points if you were to upgrade your truck to zero emission. And so I believe you can get like 126 points if you get a heavy duty zero emission truck. There's also, if you were to get a near zero, like a natural gas truck, you would only get 9 points. So it really weighs itself toward pushing trucks to be zero emission. You also get points if you put in on-site electric charging, fueling infrastructure. You get points if you do on-site solar panels, so that you're actually powering these trucks with on-site solar. You can also get points if you install air filtration systems like MERV filters in nearby homes, schools, daycares, hospitals. So there's an incentive there for these operators to help upgrade and mitigate the impacts of emissions. And then for whatever that you can't get through achieving those points, like the air district, you pay a mitigation fee. However, in this rule, all local, that mitigation money is kept locally. So it's intended to support the community that's being impacted. And yeah, so I just want to share, it's a kind of a different model in terms of really looking at the truck trips and the type of trucks, and trying to push towards zero emission. And if there is mitigation, it is local. So I just wanted to provide a little better summary there. And again, Ryan and Mark, if you have amendments to what I just shared, please edit that.
Yeah, so that our indirect source review rule does look at those truck types as well. So we assess, emissions from light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles as well. So we're analyzing the same sources, and we include project design elements that the project proponent can propose. It could be, alternative fuel trucks or electric trucks, whether they're low, medium, or heavy. And also, give them credit for anything that they may be using on site, like yard goats that may be cleaner than running on like diesel. But thank you
Thanks,
for that,
Mark.
Genevieve.
This is Genevieve. I don't know if we touched on this. I think you did, Mark, that the South Coast rule applies to all warehouses of that size. So it kind of goes back in time and captures everything, while the district's ISR works as projects are developed. So it's moving forward. So we had a lot of projects that were kind of grandfathered in.
So they cannot be retroactively incorporated?
Yeah, like as I explained, one of the main differences is South Coast's rule that's currently out there is retroactive, going off of captures existing industrial projects that are greater than 100,000 square feet, whereas the districts, when it was adopted in 2005, goes after new development projects moving forward.
Right, but a lot were kind of missed until we hit 2017, when that rule amendment, the ministerial versus discretionary. So a lot of it's kind of like 2017.
Yeah, and that's how we enhanced the rule in 2018 by ensuring, the rule's intent was to capture those projects. And so that's how we enhanced our rule in 2017 to make sure that those projects were captured.
Just to be clear, and I hate to jump in as Ryan with the air district, and I definitely don't think it was a lot. I think, but at the same time, finding ways to enhance rules and regulations to make sure things don't slip through. We did make that effort, especially considering what we were looking at were some of the a large project, which we definitely know has the potential to have big contributions to air pollution, and so that's why we took that. But the other thing to once again share, there's differences between all rules and regulations. Genevieve is absolutely correct in what she's saying about the warehouses and how it applies to all warehouses. I think one of the things where we are getting emission reductions where South Coast isn't would be like residential projects, light industrial, heavy industrial that aren't warehouses themselves. So our rule, while it doesn't cover some of the capture some of the warehouses, it is capturing a much broader type of operation through our rule.
Thanks, Ryan. That's a really good point. I see Ivanka's hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the presentation, Mark and Genevieve. And as we're ending tonight, I think my next question, as far as where do we go from here? You're talking about how there was an enhancement made in 2018 to close that loophole on the ministerial. Is there a set rule already within the IR district, or is this something that this committee can say, we're not just here tonight to be educated on the ISR rule, but that it's time to have another enhancement? And that is my hope, is that we are discussing where this current ISR is at, because it is part of our SERP to see where can it be made stronger. And I think the main thing that we have discussed tonight to make it stronger is pulling in fees to make sure that they are used within the 617, since this is the most industrial developed area that's ongoing, and those fees should be required to stay in this area for mitigated reasons. And also, we started with Ryan stating of a jurisdictional authority issue between land use in a city and the air district, but this is the air district's rule, and through enhancement there need to be more limits on what those developments can do. So back to what I said earlier, in looking at an enhancement, don't so easily give a pass for more funding. Actually create the limits. You are in and want to develop in a non-attainment area that is decades out of attainment. Therefore, we are limited on what we as an air district can, as a health agency, allow you to continue to develop in this area. So to me, it's twofold. It's not just stop paying so you can pollute. It's also, you know, making sure that the funds stay in this area. And that piece is the power of the air district. And don't be so quickly to just say you don't have the power, because if this is your rule, make the rule stronger and put more stipulations on it instead of just money given.
Thank you, Ivanka. I definitely support that. Could that potentially be an update? I mean, we constantly talk about how our AB 617 plan is a living document. And we just talked about how the MOU, it was largely a failure. Can we update our plan to at least have local mitigation, so the funds go locally in the 617 community for projects proposed in the 617 community?
Yeah,
Would anyone?
it's Ryan with Air District. We want to take all feedback that we get and you know, look at how we can incorporate it. The thing that, you know, with this rule that we're trying to do, we do try to focus, Mark talked about it, we try to focus the emission reductions as close to the communities where these projects happen. The challenge is if we don't have projects, then you may be waiting long periods of time in order to find projects in those areas. And that's contrary to what this rule is trying to do. It's trying to reduce emissions, if not before, but at least in conjunction when those emissions get generated. So, you know, I definitely don't want to sacrifice getting emission reductions, you know, as early as possible. You know, it is definitely something though that we do look to do, is to get emission reductions in the areas where those projects are going. So you know, Genevieve, you talked about, you know, funding a tractor in like San Joaquin County when it, like the projects in Fresno. You know, Mark pointed out that the majority of those happen in Fresno County, and it may not be directly in the AB 617, but they're often, you know, in close proximity to the AB 617.
Right, but we know diesel particulate matter is toxic locally, and so we're not mitigating cancer risk, and we're not mitigating increased asthma exacerbations because of local PM.
Yeah, understand that. And then like I said, I mean, we definitely want to try to find ways to find more projects, but that's the big thing, is finding the projects to fund with this money. If we don't have these things kind of in the queue, then we're going to have, you know, then we're going to be waiting and then the pollution would happen, and then those emissions wouldn't be
right. And that's the problem with voluntary incentive programs, right? And instead of having a regulation that's actually forcing turnover of trucks in the 617 community.
Well, we've talked about it here. It's not, there's not any one agency organization that's going to solve this issue. It is definitely a multi-agency.
But the district can with an update to their ISR rule.
I think there's going to be a lot of legal challenges. You know, Mark talked about it, you know, the legal challenge that's going on with South Coast. I mean, we're paying close attention to that because we want to see what happens. For example, our rule, you know, right after that rule was approved, we, you know, had a lawsuit against us that went all the way to the California Supreme Court, where we had to argue for it. And thankfully we were successful and won that, that challenge. But yeah, it's not, it's definitely challenging. And so I think we are listening to you, and we need to take this feedback. And
thanks, Ryan. I have another question, but I think we finished the presentation, So I'd love to open it up to other CSC members to share their thoughts on this issue.
If I could just quickly add, like as Ryan, just to piggyback off of Ryan's comments, that our indirect source review was established, as stringent as possible at the time it was adopted, obviously in accordance with federal and state regulations and case law. So we are paying attention to what's occurring there at South Coast, and if we can broaden and enhance our rule requirements to ensure they're more stringent, we'll have to ensure that aligns with our emission reduction strategies, our attainment plans, and seeing how we can further strengthen our rule there. So I appreciate all the feedback that's been given tonight.
Thank you, Mark. Does the CSC have any further thoughts or comments, questions to the discussion tonight?
I guess maybe to close out the discussion, since it's first in the nation, we've been contacted by other regions as well about our indirect source review rule and how that's implemented. More recently, the Colorado region reached out to us to inquire about our rule and how we implement it. And so, there are other regions that are looking at our rule.
Naomi, I saw you unmuted. Do you have a thought you want to share?
I don't know. I hope I don't rub people the wrong way, but I am feeling like, today is like, I'm feeling this negative, spirit or energy. Like, no, we cannot do anything because the city didn't want to do an MOU. Now we went the first rule, and it's almost that's what we can do. That's it. So I challenge us to think about yes, things are not going to be perfect. Things are not going to improve from one day to another. But I think that's why we're here, right? To think out of the box and to put our energies and brains and our commitments together to fix the things that are broken or that can be improved, right? So I understand that it's not going to be as easy like, oh, let's bring all the money back to where the pollution happened because of all the aspects that Ryan and Mark mentioned. We understand that, but maybe there's like a set of protocols that you put, like, okay, our first down the road we're going to go like this. First priority will be to go back to that community. If there's no project to be funded, yes, I don't want the money to go to waste. I want to see reduction. So if that's not possible, then we're going to go down the list and say, well, now, because we don't want that money to go to waste, we're going to put it into this other community that has a shovel-ready project or whatever the expression might be. But you know what I mean? So I think that let's just think of what we can do. I understand it's not going to be everything that we would want to see happen, but at least something, so that we feel that we're making progress and that we are, really being optimistic in how we can improve the chronic pollution that our neighborhoods have experienced.
Thank you, Naomi. Genevieve, do you have any other thoughts or closing remarks for this discussion?
I guess it's a question to the group on how we want to proceed. Does anyone have ideas? Do we want to learn about how, the ISR rule was implemented for the new Amazon warehouse, or is this just something that we want to keep as a standing update or couch in a certain committee? I'm just wondering what the next steps are. Ivanka?
I want to see this moved forward with how we enhance it as this CSC. I don't want to hear about how the Air District keeps patting itself on the back about what they did almost 20 years ago. And just because we might have been the first in this valley to do something doesn't mean that's the end of the road. And I think we all know that because we're still not in attainment. So I do want to see continual discussions individually using the Amazon as a primary example. And out of that discussion, learning those details of where those enhancements out of that example, where those enhancements are still needed for this South Central area, and just South area. I'll just say 617 area, but specifically we're seeing a lot of the examples rising up in the South Central area.
I support that, and I don't know how we make it actionable. Maybe I'm going to kill myself after saying this. Another subcommittee.
I think, you know, with it being related to land, I think we could definitely have it as part of the land use subcommittee. Like if we wanted to have those types of discussions. And
To Ivanka's point, this is Genevieve. Ryan, I'm hearing, you know, you want to see how the litigation plays out in the South Coast, which I understand, but I also see as a potential way to just distance ourselves from this conversation because we all know litigation can take years. And I just don't think we should be waiting years. And I think there's things that we can be doing now. And the Air District has attorneys and knows the things that we can be doing. We can also use, we can ask to have the benefit of CARB's attorneys or the Attorney General's attorneys to understand what we can do. So Ryan and Mark, can you say anything to that? Is there, can you follow up with this group on potential improvements to the rule and commit to having conversations with your attorneys? Because I just don't know if the wait and see approach is sufficient for a community that's dealing with so much pollution.
yeah, I mean, it's I think part of the reason why we talk about that, Genevieve, is because I mean we see you know the questions that they're being raised. I think they're legitimate, and I think that's what we have courts in place for. You know, to make those decisions on whether you know it is proper, it is not proper. It's hard, you know, in regards to whether we can talk to our legal team, and it's definitely something you know we can have those discussions. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I think we can commit to you know having those conversations and you know bringing back information to the committee.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, that was a lazy answer if I ever heard one. You know, I have to agree, litigation takes forever, but you can have those discussions and maybe think outside of the box, think, you know, how is the litigation? You have all the questions that you know that they're asking about. How can you think outside of the box and get something moving forward versus what we keep doing, which is procrastinate, then put people in a time crunch and force them into a decision that may basically is insulting to their time and their energy on this committee. So yeah, I want to see both from the city, the state, the Air District, more positive, yes, we can attitude of doing things versus, well, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you. And it's 6 months to a year and nothing has changed. You know, so let's not insult the residents of Fresno, and definitely let's not insult the members of this committee who have gone through 50 of these meetings. Let's have a little respect for their time, all right? Thank you.
Thank you all for the comments and great questions. We've noted a few things to follow up with this regarding the ISR, so on the action item, so we can review it together at the end, so y'all can make amendments, but definitely noted it as a something to add on the list of the continual discussion topic. Sounds like something the committee wants to revisit frequently or regularly. All right. I think with that, I'm going to move us along to standing updates. We have a few time-sensitive standing updates, unless there are any other pressing questions or comments with this topic. Okay, I'm going to pass it off to, let's see, we have the Residential Air Filtration Subcommittee. Is there a volunteer from there, or Ophelia can speak to any updates regarding that? Again, just as a reminder for our interpreters, please state your name before you speak and remember to speak slowly so they can keep up with interpretation. Thank you. Anyone from the Residential Air Filtration Subcommittee present and can speak to any updates?
I'm happy to give some quick updates for the subcommittee, and if anyone else who attended the meeting wants to jump in, I'm happy to pass it to you all as well. Just some quick updates is we did discuss a few things we talked about in this, sorry, this is Stephanie from the Air District. And so we did talk about a few things in terms, one of those being eligibility for the program. Generally, it was discussed, of course, residents within our boundary, and then also potentially daycares that are in the boundary that are licensed and in home. We also talked about outreach and prioritization for this program, potentially partnering with different organizations that work on asthma programs, small children, and then also thinking about potentially doing workshops in the community to help people apply, and generally thinking about two modes of distribution, in-person events and direct to home shipments. And just some quick updates about just like next steps. The district is working on drafting a project plan, kind of taking in all of the feedback from the group. And this is something we'll take to our district governing board, and we're looking to do this in potentially December. And I see maybe a couple of people that attended, so if anyone else has any comments, feel free to please add in.
I could add something. This is Ophelia Bundes with Fresno COG. So we were talking about outreach and prioritization. So the two modes we're looking into distributing information is in-person events and then sending direct information to home, much like a pilot program, in order to go ahead and give out that information and see who qualifies for the devices that are going to be given out, and still seeing if there's options for purifiers that are able to take larger spaces, so like filter large, such as a living room, because before we were thinking of something that's just for a room, but if it could cover more space, it would be more beneficial. So that's what we were discussing in the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for that update? All right, moving on to the trees subcommittee. I believe the Air District will share some updates around that.
Yeah, so we'd put out a request for proposal, and I'm happy to say that we had some individuals apply. We actually had one group apply for both, so one for each, I should say. Not one group, but two separate groups. One applied for or gave a proposal for vegetative barriers, and one gave a proposal for the urban greening. And so what we had talked about doing in the previous subcommittees was, if we had multiple ones, bringing it back and kind of going over the different proposals and working with the steering committees to select one, both, or multiple. In light of only having one, what we're proposing to do would be to bring these proposals to the subcommittee and have discussions about them. We're still in the process of reviewing the proposals that we received for completeness. So I think once we complete those evaluations, we'll go ahead and send out a doodle to set up a subcommittee meeting to go over them with the subcommittee.
Thanks, Ryan. Any questions or comments regarding the trees subcommittee update? All right, moving on to CARB. Gonna pass it off to either Jennifer or Brian to provide updates.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Magana from CARB's OCAP. First and foremost, congratulations on your 50th meeting. Your dedication and hard work certainly shows. With that said, I'll share a few brief updates, and I'll also post the information in the chat at the end. October 13th, so tomorrow, CARB will be having the board meeting to consider the Arvin Lamont SERP, and also the staff report is posted on the website for you to take a look at if you're interested. On October 20th, the 2022 Draft Community Air Grants Workshop will take place. It's to review the application, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and tune in for that. October 27th is the public hearing to consider the proposed Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. I know Ivanka had expressed the importance of attending that, and that begins at 9 a.m. And then on November 3rd is the joint meeting between the California Air Resources Board, California Transportation Commission, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Joint meetings assist the state efforts to meet air quality and climate goals, in addition to the state's critical transportation and housing needs. So if you're interested in that, the time hasn't been publicized yet, but stay tuned and we'll keep updating you on that. And then, of course, if there's any questions, concerns, feel free to email myself or Brian. And that's all.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, and then lastly, we have Caltrans. I believe David Padilla will provide any updates regarding that.
Yes, thank you. This is David Padilla with Caltrans Planning. I just have one update, and I just like to make the announcement that the draft fiscal year 2025 Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Application Guide was released last week for a 30-day public review. With this next cycle of the planning grants, we are providing a separate funding category, which is augmenting $50 million in climate adaptation. So that's a one-year shot. We will be having a virtual workshop once the public review is completed on the draft application guide on November 9th and 10th. These workshops will provide stakeholders with a comment summary, the anticipated updates, and a final input opportunity. After the workshops, the application guide will be finalized and released this fall. So we're looking for sustainable planning grant ideas, as well as climate adaptation planning grant ideas. That's all I have.
Thank you, David. Any questions or comments regarding the updates from Caltrans? And I see Jennifer posted the dates and events in the chat. And I guess wanted to just follow up, Jennifer, is there also an email that have all these dates that folks can look for?
I will go ahead and forward the info to the district for them to distribute as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to just review the few action items we have tonight. Ensure we capture them correctly, and if there are any corrections or clarifying questions, please just feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. So the first,
Dr. Before you start that, and
yes,
the last set of action items. At the last meeting, I had asked about whether or not the Air District was going to weigh in on the rezone application that's going to be considered at City Council meeting tomorrow for 92.5 acres located at Elm Avenue in West Fresno, certainly in the AB 617 area. And I asked whether or not the Air District would be weighing in, and I don't think I heard any update, and I don't know that I've seen anything that would suggest that they would that the Air District would be as concerned as West Fresno residents about wanting to go back to a light industrial zoning versus neighborhood mixed use. So could I get an update on that, please?
Yeah, Dr. Curry, it's Ryan with the Air District. We definitely comment on that one as well. We provided the steering committee member the comment letter that was sent in regards to that project. So that was our formal comments on the project.
And was that was sent recently, or that was sent last year?
That was the one that we sent out a while back.
Okay, is there any objection or problem with resending it to each of the city council members?
What we'll do is I'll check to see if it's part of the board item for tomorrow, and then take steps if it's not.
Is there any possibility you can actually show up and reiterate what you wrote as part of the public comment process? Because if you get the letter even to them tonight, they probably will not see it before the meeting tomorrow.
So kind of going back to what I've talked about in the past, Lisa, I feel like as a agency, our best course of action is providing written comments to fully capture our positions on these projects.
So that would be a no.
That would be a no. Okay.
Ryan, do we know if the ISR rule applied to this project?
I can speak to that. I don't have that information in front of me right now, but if it's subject to a discretionary approval and there's new development associated with it and it exceeds any of the applicability thresholds within the rule, it would.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to say that I feel really disgusted because as we've noticed, as someone remarked, this is what, 50 meetings? And this was always one of the consistent concerns, not only that I have voiced, but other members have voiced, and that is, this persistent work on improving air quality and talking about it. And yet when there's an opportunity to check the city or to at least weigh in on the side of residents in service of the information that you have and the efforts that we are all say that we're really engaged in, it seems just a waste of time to continue to have these kind of discussions. And then every time there's an opportunity for pushing back or at least stepping in and stepping in on the scales on the side of residents, that there's such a reluctance to do so. And I don't understand if 50 plus more meetings is not going to, doesn't seem like that's going to change this overall position and this overall structure. And even as we ask people to purchase electric vehicles and we make all of these small changes, if our community continues to be racked with industrial sites that are spewing pollution, and even when we rezone, we need to relitigate that over and over again, it just seems like this is a monumental waste of time. And I don't see where there's any change. And so the definition of insanity is really doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So that's really frustrating.
I have the exact same feelings.
So this is Ryan again, and Dr. Curry, I hear what you're saying. The thing that I fall back on is like, what you're talking about and where you see changes. So when we shared the letter that we had provided to the city, with the steering committee at the time, we received a lot of feedback because it had incorporated everything that you're talking about into that letter. And as an agency, we have made substantive changes to the commenting that we are providing on these types of projects for that exact reason. The question.
Well, I want to give you credit for, yes, stepping in on this particular time. But as we can see, clearly it's insufficient, right? Like the scales are not tipped towards doing the right thing because it's the right thing. And so there has to be some exertion of additional power, hierarchical power, but clearly it isn't sufficient. And again, I'm just questioning if we commit to 50 more meetings and we're still having the same discussion, what have we accomplished?
And frankly, Ryan, the ask is as little as, can you resend it? That takes, sending an email takes 2 minutes. Literally 2 minutes. So I just don't understand.
I personally would like him to show up to the meeting and just reiterate what the letter says. It's not, you're not deviating from anything that the district, you're not making this stuff up. You're just reiterating and reminding the city council what the letter says. That's it. And why is that so hard?
Ryan, do you want to speak to that? Seems like there's a few follow-up questions for you.
Like I mentioned, think outside of the box. Let's get to yes. If this committee wants you to do that, if the committee wants you to remind them, like I said, you can send out that letter tonight. The chances of them actually seeing it and reading it before they make a decision is going to be very slim unless you call every single office and somebody in every single office to remind them of what that letter says. It would be best suited for you to, you could even call in, for God's sake, off your iPad and, wait in line with the rest of us and make comments. I mean, it isn't that hard unless you're lazy.
Lisa?
I do want to acknowledge that
I
CARB
think-
has resent their letter, and I do appreciate that. And, I don't have any personal vendetta against anyone, but I think as an organization and as a structure, if you're not going to weigh in on the side of the folks that you're working to improve air quality, what is really the point? And so I just, I don't hear response to that, and I hear such reluctance that it makes me question what this whole process is about and whether or not this is a spinning our wheels exercise for the sake of checking a box. And again, wasting time is really a disgusting feeling. So, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Curry, I will double check to see if our comment letter is a part of the packet. And if it's not, we'll see what we can do.
Thanks so for those thoughts and comments. Also added something along those lines, I guess, to the action item. So seeing that we are on time, so I'm going to just wrap us up and review these action items. So the first one, we have Air District will send a follow-up email with instructions on how to submit feedback on how to improve the annual reports. Next one, Air District will schedule a subcommittee meeting to discuss an MOU with the City of Fresno. Any questions or comments with these two items? Or any clarifying questions? All right, next we have the City of Fresno will follow up about clear action steps on how residents can access short courses about land use. Any comments or questions on this action item? Next, we have Air District will follow up regarding suggested modifications and updates to the ISR rule, and we will add ISR as a continual discussion topic for the agenda. And then lastly, just with this most recent conversation, the Air District will follow up regarding submitting their letter to the City Council regarding the rezoning project that Dr. Curry raised today. Any suggested modifications or comments with these action items we proposed? All right. And just to wrap us up, our next meeting will take place on October 19th. That'll be the third Wednesday. And then, I'm sorry, our agenda setting meeting will be next Wednesday on October 19th at 4:30 p.m. And then our next CSC meeting will take place on November 16th at 5:30 p.m. And so far, the suggested agenda item for that topic in November will be the continued air monitoring discussion as suggested. So as usual, we usually have one large agenda item with a few time-sensitive updates or topics. But if you have any other suggestions or thoughts with a discussion for November, I encourage you to either attend the agenda setting meeting next week or send an email to the Air District. Okay, and with that said, we can open it up to public comments. I also want to just make space for any announcements that y'all want to make since you have your colleagues in the community present here. Go ahead, Naomi.
Well, an important announcement since I believe is happening. When is our next meeting?
The CSC meeting?
Uh-huh.
It'll be on November 16th.
Okay, well, since our meeting is after this, it's important for everybody that is concerned about pesticides to know that, and I believe it has been circulated through the listserv for AB 617, the Department of Pesticide Regulation is hosting one of the only 2 in-person workshops to give an update on their pesticide notification regulation or program that they're developing. The other one is far away from us. It's going to be Ventura, and the one here in the Valley will be up in Tulare at the Orosi Veterans Hall. It will be in the late afternoon, and definitely I know it's not in Fresno, but it's worth taking the time to go and really understanding what they're proposing to do and giving our feedback, because once the rules or the programs are developed and we didn't give feedback, then I feel like, okay, we missed the opportunity to help shape that program in the best way possible. And basically what it would do is that it would allow residents and people who live near fields where pesticides apply to get notified before the chemicals are applied, which is a big problem that we have heard. Not so much in Fresno, but in Chapter, in Arvilla for sure. So I think that this is an important moment to give our feedback on that. And there is going to be a listening session or workshop, I don't know how they're calling it, by the Environmental Protection Agency here on November 2nd, and that will be in Fresno City Hall. And this is to talk about the PM 2.5 plan for the Valley.
Thank you, Naomi. Any other announcements? All right, can open it up for public comments before we close the evening.
Sorry, I did have one more announcement. I thought maybe Stephanie was going to make it, but I'll make it. Just a friendly reminder that we do have the Lawnmower Exchange coming up on the 29th, and we've sent you all sorts of information about it. So continue to get the word out about it. We're not to our 250 registrations yet. We're about halfway there. So keep spreading the word. Thanks.
Jamie, and I forgot to ask this question before. I know that we're discussing the monitors or the air purifier, sorry, for AB 617 area, but can you say a brief word about the status of the program, the one that is available in the 8 counties? I know it has been closed in some counties, including Fresno. Can you give a quick update on that?
Yes, it is totally sold out. We're not taking applications anymore from any counties. I will say that we're auditing the numbers, and there may be that we have a very small, like maybe an additional 10 people in each county that we kind of put on a waiting list. So there's a chance that a few of those people might get moved up. So once we fully close it out, we'll be looking at it and seeing kind of what the next step is. and where there are opportunities both within AB 617 communities. If this community wants to do an air filtration program, which I know, a residential air filtration program, which I know they've discussed, and then just valley-wide. So that's coming.
Thank you, Jamie and Naimeen. All right, any other last announcements before we close the evening? Okay, as always, thank you. I'll pass it to Ryan for closing remarks and then Genevieve to close us off.
Just thanks everybody that participated and provided feedback, and thank Mark and Genevieve for working together on today's discussion about ISR, and wish everybody a good night.
Hey y'all, I don't have any comments prepared, but I think we should all reflect on what the last 50 meetings mean for us and how to approach this process moving forward, because I'm personally disappointed and lacking motivation to continue. But I will say goodnight because we all have families and lives to get back to. So I hope you and